Welcome back to Bombastic Nation, a ting, a ting, a ting. I'm Mr. Giant and I'm back with some more vibes for all you. And several people have suggested I watch this video, and this one is called VE Day Canadian Veterans Celebrated in the Netherlands. So we're gonna go take a look at this, and I know there's some correlation between Canada and the Netherlands and stuff. I do believe it's during the Second World War. So we're gonna go check this out and see what this is all about. Okay, let's YouTube and simmer.
The Netherlands in the spring. Beautiful. Flowers in full bloom, parks pristine, streets spotless. It's a far cry from what the same spots were like 70 years ago. The Germans had leveled the cities, murdered those who got in the way, and sent tens of thousands of Jews to be gassed in death camps. The Dutch who were left were starving after the 5 years of brutal Nazi occupation. By 1945, they were so hungry, some were eating tulip bulbs to stay alive.
Wow.
Starved, rickets-ridden bodies of this Dutch family are witnesses to the treatment the Germans meted out to our friends in Holland.
That's when the Canadians arrived, blasting their way into towns like this one, Apeldoorn, crushing the Nazis, liberating the people. The Dutch have never forgotten, never. And this week, they'll be in these streets again, by the thousands, to welcome back some of those Canadians, now in their 90s, who gave them their country, their lives back.
See, I never knew this. You never hear this side of it. And luckily, I started watching more about the Canadian history and stuff like that. And through the comment section, some of you all let me know about this. And thank you for letting me know about this here. Because I never heard about it. I wasn't even aware of I should say, magnitude of the Canadian involvement in this war and helping liberate people. I've seen movies where you see a little bit about them, but not anything extensive. So, thank you guys for letting me know about this, because this is a part of history that I didn't know about. And now I'm learning all I can about it, and it's kind of intriguing, to say the least.
I've been coming here for 20 years, never ceasing to be amazed at the Dutch determination to say thank you. The street with its pennants and Canadian flags is representative of many streets across the Netherlands right now, as the Dutch mark the major contribution that Canada played in the liberation of their country half a century ago.
I'm very young. I only hear stories from my grandfather and grandmother. But yes, they freed us 50 years ago, so that's why I'm here.
I think it's a love affair between the Canadians and the Dutch.
Well, 60 years is an awfully long time, but not long enough for the Dutch to forget the pain, the loss, the suffering, and the oppression of living under Nazi rule all those years during the Second World War. And not long enough either to forget the liberation and those who brought it to them.
It's a beautiful day. Out of this world.
I'm feeling liberated.
107,000 people left this place on the trains destined for the death camps of Nazi-occupied Europe. 102,000 of them perished in those camps. On days like this, the Dutch come to remember what happened here more than 65 years ago.
The camp life was dominated by the train. The train was taking away 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 prisoners, and you pray being not on the list.
Why do they never forget? Just listen to some of the stories we've heard over the years.
And I said, do you eat that every day? Sure. You want some? I'll give you a whole loaf. A whole loaf of white bread. I ran to the house and I planted it on the breakfast table and I said, here, look at it. Canadians are here.
Look at this street sign in an Apeldoorn suburb. If the name looks Canadian, it's because it is. A dozen streets in this neighborhood are named after one of the almost 8,000 Canadians who never came home from the battle. What was it about those young men who, through the generations, the Dutch won't stop thanking? Who were those guys? George Beale was one of them, a major with the 48th Highlanders. Every few days he'd stop and write a letter home to his wife, Ruth, in Toronto. This is one of them. Here's what he said. My own darling, I haven't written you for 5 days. I didn't feel much like it, sweetie, as we were fighting again, and I was awfully busy, and we've been having a tough fight. At the moment, I'm sitting in a city called Apeldoorn, and the Queen's Palace is within 100 yards of me. That's the Queen's Palace, right over there. We're about 100 yards from it. He might have been right here. We entered the town proper this morning, after a big advance from the Isle River. I'm fine, Ruth, so don't worry, although I'm very tired. The enemy's running like the devil again, and we have to chase him. The fighting was bloody, and the dying. But through it all, George wrote to Ruth about the love he had for his men. He wrote this one on Sunday, April 22nd. I have fought and lived with those men for over a year, and to me they seemed as though they were part of my family. They never refused to go any place I ordered, and did everything I asked them to, cheerfully and willingly, knowing most of the time that I might be sending them to their deaths. There were lots of individual Canadian heroes here, Army men like George Beale, but Air Force flyers too. 50 years ago, these fields near Nistelrode in southeastern Holland were home base for a Royal Canadian Air Force Spitfire squadron. One of those Canadian pilots was a 22-year-old chap from Lethbridge, Alberta, whose name was Richard Odette. Well, near the end of December 1944, Odette had flown more than 50 missions. But up until that point, he had scored no German kills. Well, on the 29th of December 1944, all that changed. When Richard Odette flew out of one of these fields, he flew right into the history books. Before he returned, he had shot down 5 German aircraft. No other Canadian pilot, no other British pilot had scored that many victories in one mission. Meanwhile, frontline fighters broke through to capture key strategic locations. All this was happening as the Nazis were facing their final desperate days, until that last moment when the fighting and the dying suddenly stopped. 70 years ago this week, the war ended.
Man, I tell you something here, you know what I mean? It's important to hear these stories. It's really important, because I think people who haven't been through it don't quite understand it. And they only see it as something historic that somebody is doing. Now, the people who fought understand it. So I think it falls on those who haven't experienced it and yet hear the stories from it, to not only look at the historic side of it, or the heroic side of it, I should say, but also look at the suffering side of it. And I think the suffering side should be told just as much as the heroic side. So that way we could figure out that this is something that we shouldn't keep doing. Because if we romanticize it with the historic all the time and overemphasize this whole romantic idea of it, then it wouldn't seem like something that people would want to stop. People would fantasize about it. Because, like, for instance, with everything that's going on right now, I hear people here who haven't experienced that speak of the heroics mainly, but nobody speak of the suffering as much. Now, I'm not saying it's not on the news and stuff, the suffering, but then when they talk about the suffering, they mainly use it for political reasons and not for the fact that there's human beings in there. You know what I mean? They politicize it. So it's really good to tell the stories from the soldiers and from the actual people that are there, the actual people who are being victimized. One might say it's more important to tell from the people who are being victimized, because you hear stories. the story should have an impact on you. And most of us should go, we can't let this happen again. And then we have to stop politicizing it and humanizing it more than anything else. You know what I'm saying? And that should go for every race, every nationality, every creed, everybody, because we're all human beings when it comes down to it, right? So it's good to see that he's telling the story from the soldier's perspective. And they have there's a lady at first in there. I could imagine okay. I remember from my own experience when the planes overhead ceased and the gunfire ceased and the explosions ceased, the absolute and pure peace that came from that. You know, it's like, you know, you could get sleep, even though you still have tormented sleep, but you could still get sleep. Because your body is like, you know, you're mentally drained and you're physically drained, you know. I don't know how to convey that to everybody else, because then from their perspective they look at you differently, but they hear what you're saying, but they don't feel what you're saying. Does that make sense? Because then in one breath they say they understand, and in the next breath they go, oh, we should bomb, we should kill, we should conquer, we should do this. And I don't know how most people who go through that feel. I think most ordinary people who go through that feel, we don't want that to happen again. We don't want that to happen to this person. We don't want that to happen to that person. And I guess most people say that, but I think they take the approach that in order for it not to happen again, we should suppress a whole group of people and a whole group of people's ideas. You know what I mean? Like I remember I had a comment on there where a gentleman told me that his grandmother, I believe, or his great-grandmother was German. And after the war, even though she wasn't a supporter of what was happening with Hitler, she wouldn't allow them to speak German in the house. She wanted to forget who she was. Whereas that shouldn't be. You shouldn't forget who you are because of one period in history. You should remember who you are. You know, and we shouldn't suppress people and make people not be proud of who they are because of what a group of people have done. You know what I mean? And we tend to do that. Let's keep going here.
And here's what George Beale wrote to Ruth on that same day. You can feel the emotion in his voice. Darling, you couldn't possibly have any idea just what kind of a reception it has been and still is. The people go simply mad.
You see, even with the great reception, they still wouldn't understand.
My Jeep. Any town we went through, the people crowded the roads, and we had a most difficult time getting past them. They all want to touch your hand or even kiss you, and they simply pelted us with flowers. My Jeep looked like a florist shop. It does make all the hardships worthwhile when you see the joy of these liberated people. For this year's returning heroes, new medals from the local mayor.
Your memories, your thoughts guide us as we shape our future.
And new thoughts about an old battle.
Well, I was stationed here during the war as a Canadian Women's Army Corps, which I'm very proud of. And it brings back so many memories. And I always have a place in my heart for Holland, for Appledore.
It's a great, great day, you know. For the little thing we did, we get so much, 1,000 times more time.
The Dutch people are so
The Dutch people are the
faithful to
best
us.
people in the world, and I mean it.
Wangeningen just down the road from Apeldoorn, in that little building. That's where the Germans finally surrendered. These extraordinary pictures capture the moment.
To the Commander-in-Chief, 21 Army Group. These forces to lay down their arms and to surrender unconditionally.
And there at the table, Canadian General George Kitching, distinguished then and just as distinguished when I chatted with him at the same table 50 years later. How do you feel when you come back in this room?
It's almost as if they're ghosts, as if you are the German on the opposite side of the table, Peter. It was full of people then, Any movement, it was a very quiet room. And in spite of the fact that there were 30 Canadian reporters, they were quiet.
The general is gone now, and so are many of the men who fought with him. But the ones who are left, the ones who still come, the ones the Dutch, young and old, still so adore, are here with their memories. The ones that hurt, the ones that leave them quiet, and the ones that somehow make them smile.
I've never felt that I sacrificed anything to be part of a liberating army.
There were so many Canadians who lost their lives here in the Netherlands. How did you handle that on a day-to-day basis?
I put it out of my mind altogether, but nonetheless I cry when I go to the cemetery and see my friends' graves. I never learned to cry. You just feel it inside.
What does it mean to you guys to be remembered the way you are here in this country, the way they look at you, the way they react to you?
Well, it's 70 years ago that we were here, but still, the kids are still enthusiastic about what we did here 70 years ago. And I love to see kids, the way they greet us and the way they look in such admiration at us, you know.
Really, it was something to feel the happiness, the joy of the liberation.
I asked the people I was staying with, what is this touching bit, you know? They asked permission to touch you, and I couldn't get over that. So they want to touch a liberator, and they want their children to touch a liberator.
20 years ago, I asked the then mayor of Apeldoorn why it was that the Dutch never forgot the Canadians. His answer was very simple, very direct. He said, you have to have been occupied to appreciate what freedom really means.
See?
And when you do, you never forget who gave it to you. That's why Canada is never forgotten here. Never.
No, here's the thing. Liberation. When 1983 happened, did I feel liberated? I don't know. Because it was a different type of situation, I do believe, you know what I mean? It was like a battle between two superpowers for territory as far as I'm concerned, you know what I mean? That's my personal opinion of what happened in my country. It is great that the Dutch people remember the Canadians like that. I don't feel like they do. I mean, as far as what happened in my country. But it's absolutely great because they were liberated. I mean, they had these people in there creating havoc and sending people off to death camps and stuff like that. You know, I didn't experience that. That wasn't happening. What I could understand is the effect of war itself, because make no mistake about it, it was war. I could totally understand that, and I don't know how to convey that to everybody else, because then they look at you differently when you speak of it. How the Dutch people are dealing with it is the greatest way you could deal with it. When you talk of it today, you get empathy or the hero worship and stuff like that. They want to touch human beings, you know. I think the touching too is part of wanting to feel what they felt as they were liberating the Dutch. I really do. You know what I mean? It's like a touch back into time or something like that. You know, like I would love to have met World War I and II veterans and shake their hand, you know, just to feel what they feel somehow, some kind of telepathic thing, you know what I mean? But this is a great film. Thank you so much for suggesting that for me, you know what I mean? I'm going to leave a link in the description for this video. You could go check it out yourself, you know, without me babbling through it. But we need to start taking care of each other. Because I'll be honest with you, politicians ain't going to take care of us. The rich ain't going to take care of us. We have to start taking care of each other. We have to start recognizing each other for the good things that we do, the liberation that happened here. And pay more attention to that, not in a political perspective, but in a human perspective, like they do in here. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this with me. Take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.